today we're going to talk about Michelangelo, who is a native of Florence, and we're going to make a fall treat that is extremely particular to the area of Florence and literally nowhere else, like literally the province of Florence and not even all of it, okay, just part of it. So the places we're going to talk about are what you see on the map. So we're going to mention Caprese Michelangelo, which is where Michelangelo was born. It used to be called Caprese, now they actually call it Caprese Michelangelo. Florence, Settignano, which is kind of it's almost like a suburb of Florence, up in the hills next to Fiesole. Some of y'all have probably been up there. The two marble quarries that are going to come into play are Karara and Seravezza, which are up here near Forte dei Marmi. Rome, where Michelangelo spent much of his career in Poppiano, which of course is where I live. And here's where I live at Poppiano. Y'all have seen that. I live here that's my house on the right on the estate of the Castle of Poppiano, which you see there. So here is Michelangelo. This is a portrait that was done in old age by one of his collaborators called Daniele da Volterra. And he drew this portrait of Michelangelo near the end of his life. And I included that close up because you can actually see it's been pricked for transfer. So they used this image, this is a life image, they used this for other portraits of Michelangelo in painting and also sculpture. You can see all the little pinholes here. So they pricked that for transfer. So Michelangelo is one of the best known artists on the planet. And I feel sure that all of y'all have heard of Michelangelo, and I'm sure a lot of y'all have seen works by Michelangelo. He also is one of the most long-lived artists. He died at almost age, he was 88 and sort of 11/12, in a time period when a lot of people, average lifespan was sort of 40, right? So he had this huge career, he created tons of works, and the amount of literature on Michelangelo is astounding. So I'm going to talk about one tiny little aspect of his art and provide some examples that help illuminate what I'm going to talk about. And there's a lot more to talk about Michelangelo, but there's just so much of his output that you have to narrow in on something. And so I've decided to narrow in on two late Pieta, and that's what we're really going to concentrate on. So first, just a little bit of background. He was born in Caprese Michelangelo, like I said, which is this adorable little town. You see that there on the left up on the little hilltop in Casentino to the east of Arezzo. And that's the house where he was born. His father was a government employee, basically, kind of a diplomat. He was a podesta. So he was in charge of the municipality of Caprese in 1475 when Michelangelo was born. And that's a cute little town. They have a great chestnut festival. It's fun to go visit in the fall. They moved back to Florence when Michelangelo was teeny. And then his father sent him to Settignano when his mom died. So the mom died at age 6, and he was sent to a nanny in Settignano, which is just above Florence. And what you're looking at there is this beautiful Macchiaioli image. So remember Telemaco Signorini? He painted this 1880, the main square in Settignano. So Michelangelo spent several years here with a nanny whose husband was a stone worker. So he kind of got his first introduction to working stone as a very young boy when he was up here. He was then apprenticed to a painting workshop in Florence. So he's sort of 13, 14, and he catches the eye of Lorenzo de' Medici. And he is the Lorenzo the Magnificent, the Medici ruler of sort of the city-state of Florence in the end of the 1400s. And at that point, Michelangelo is brought into the humanist court. He's brought into the Medici palace, where this humanist court of Lorenzo the Magnificent is meeting and sort of, guiding along artists. And he is in contact with all sorts of philosophers of humanism, authors, and he's being influenced, of course, by the works of art that he sees around him. So the works of art that you're looking at here were made by Michelangelo when he was about 18, 19 years old. So he's a very young person. He's just getting going. He's being super influenced by humanism, the idea of looking back at the past, classicism, classical art, and he's being influenced by the works of art that he sees in Florence. And two of the artists who are super influential in this period in Tuscany, the sculptors, Giovanni Pisano, who you can see the influence on Michelangelo there on the left, and then on the right, Donatello. So these are kind of, as an 18-year-old, you're going to be taken in, you're a sponge, you're going to show some influence, some of that kind of, reflections of the people who are influential on you. And in these two really early works, these are the earliest known works that we have of Michelangelo, you can kind of see that. And he's working through kind of this idea, kind of classical and humanistic idea. So he's representing human figures in a very natural way. He, on the left there, it's called the Battle of the Centaurs, done in 1492. Same year that Columbus discovered America. Of course, Michelangelo is already studying and talking to the humanist scholars in the court of Lorenzo the Magnificent. And he does this work of art that is kind of similar to Roman sarcophagi. He is looking at works of art by Giovanni Pisano, which also kind of have this rhythmic quality to these really populated groups of figures that are done in very high relief. But look at how the rhythm kind of goes towards the center, and there's like this sort of circular movement in the rhythm that goes out to the edges. He's also obviously working on depicting the human figure in a realistic way. On the right, he's done what we call a rilievo schiacciata. It's a very low relief, flattened relief, which was made kind of known by the great sculptor Donatello. And I went ahead and included that here for you because we're about to make a schiacciata. Okay, so the recipe we're making is a schiacciata. Well, this is a schiacciato. So it just means flattened, basically. In this case, it's flat marble. So in the space of 1/4 of an inch, Michelangelo was able to represent everything you see here, including that recession into space. Notice also the classicizing elements of the Madonna figure, this very kind of strong presence. And then the Christ child on her lap, who's got some musculature of his own. But look at that arm. Look at how that arm kind of curves around the back and then hangs down. You're going to see that later. So Michelangelo here is sort of 18, 19 years old. 1492, Lorenzo the Magnificent dies. The Medici court kind of comes to a crashing halt. The Medici are actually exiled at one point, and Michelangelo's kind of on his own. And he travels around a bit. And he ends up in Rome, and he gets this great commission. He's asked to do a funerary monument for the French ambassador to Rome. He's sort of 21 and 22 years old. And here we go. And he decides to, I'm not sure who chose the theme. It's a funerary monument. This is to go on the tomb of the French ambassador of Rome. And he chooses Michelangelo, who's already made a name for himself, at least on some levels, to create this monument. And he chooses to do a Pieta. I'm sure this is, I'm sure a lot of y'all have seen this. This is in St. Peter's. It's one of the most famous works of art on the planet. It's considered one of the most sort of perfect examples of high Renaissance sculptural canons. It cemented Michelangelo's reputation. So here we have this kind of very harmonious composition, highly polished, solid triangle of these idealized figures, right? And what he's doing is he's showing you this Pieta. He's kind of like transcended reality, right? This is an ideal. These are ideal figures. He's transcended reality. It's like so real, it's not real anymore. And he's inviting meditation on this scene. So what is this scene? It is the Pieta, which is part of the passion narrative of Christ, which of course includes the crucifixion, the deposition from the cross, which is when after Christ's death, he's taken down off the cross. He is placed in the lap of his mother Mary, the Pieta, what we're looking at here. That's followed by the lamentation when Mary Magdalene appears as well as other followers of Christ, and they grieve over the body of Christ. Then the entombment and the resurrection. So that's sort of part of the passion, though, is kind of very important for Michelangelo and obviously important for the commissioner of this work of art. So this is the Pieta. Pietas in Latin means, so this is in Latin before the Christian church is founded. Dutifulness, affection, love, loyalty, and gratitude. And then within the church, it gets sort of transferred into affective piety, tenderness, and of course we use it today to mean really religious devotion. And that's what we're looking at here in the Pieta. So in a way, this is a historical moment. This is a thing that actually happened. This person died and was placed on the lap of his mother. But we've transcended reality and with Michelangelo's depiction. And he's really created this object of meditation. So his approach to art from a young age through his whole career really is in observing human nature, exploring our interior life, and sort of considering our eventual fate. So he's very kind of existentialist in his approach, combined with humanism, which of course considers classicism, classical art, and considers history as being very relevant for the present. So these are all things that shape Michelangelo's career as he goes forward. This is his first sort of, major work. And like I said, it really cemented his career. A lifetime of important commissions followed. And again, he lived to be sort of, 89 in a world where the average lifespan was 40. So he turned into this kind of cultural icon who created, icons of Western art that we're all familiar with. And legends abound about his working methods, his living habits, his personality. He was considered this sort of almost slovenly, solitary, cranky, impetuous genius, right? Who abandoned works of art just because he felt like it. He might be some of that, but he's certainly not all of that. A lot of that's urban legend, right? So he worked for extremely important patrons, people like the Pope or the Medici Dukes. They very much appreciated his artistry. They also appreciated his deference to power, but he was at their mercy, and he realized that. So his life was very much, and career was very much dictated by the will of his patrons. And the reason I'm telling you this is because maybe he did abandon quite a few works, but it wasn't just because he felt like it or he got bored or just, decided to do something else. So for example, this is the Tomb of Julius II. He was given this commission in 1505, just after the Pieta by Pope Julius II della Rovere. This thing it was never completed. They just sort of installed what you see there on the left 40 years later, okay? So it took 40 years to get this thing together. And it wasn't because Michelangelo was slow, it was because plans changed, the Pope died, another Pope was more important. So he was literally being moved around by the greatest powers on the European continent. So for example, he was asked to create this enormous monument, funerary monument to Julius II, which was to be erected in the Church of St. Peter, the old Church of St. Peter, the one that was founded by Constantine in the 4th century AD. By the time this thing was completed, that church no longer existed, right? It was being replaced with the current day Basilica of St. Peter's that we all, that we've all seen photographs of or have visited. So in the intervening years, there were periods of work, there were periods of downtime where he was someplace else. The plans changed, the work was made smaller, it was made bigger, it was changed in every way. So here's some figures that were sculpted to go on the monument of Julius II. These are 2 slaves that are in the collection of the Louvre right now. They're pretty much finished, but they were basically left behind because they were no longer needed in the new plans. I'm showing you this on purpose because there's this flaw right here. I want y'all to see that flaw in the stone. So kind of keep in mind that whenever you open up a block of marble, there's no way to know what's under there, right? So here's a flaw that basically Michelangelo decided to live with, which is literally a black mark through the guy's face. Here's another set of slaves, different dimensions than the other 2. The previous 2 in the Louvre, these are in the Museo dell'Accademia. These were abandoned, clearly unfinished. Basically, the project changed and Michelangelo was brought elsewhere. I've heard art historians say, he miscalculated, they weren't going to stand up. If he finished them, they were going to fall over. I'm like, I think Michelangelo, the reason the Pope hired him is because he knew how to make a statue stand up. It wasn't going to fall over. He wasn't allowed to finish it. And interestingly, these blocks were not reworked by other artists. Enormous blocks of stone that are quarried from places where that kind of stuff exists is usually very far from where you want it. It's expensive to get it out of there. It's expensive to move it. And once you have it, you use it. So the fact that these were kept in this form means that somebody recognized the fact that this was a big deal by a master artist. It wasn't because he made a mistake. He was literally, his time was kind of not his own, basically, right? So one reason he was taken off of the Julius tomb was to go work in San Lorenzo. So this was a political rivalry between the Della Rovere family and the Medici family. So the new Medici Pope, after the death of Julius II, Leo X, like, yeah, you're going to Florence and you're going to work on the Medici family church. So you can see a design that was done for the facade of San Lorenzo. Never done. San Lorenzo looks just like this. He did spend 3 years on that though. He also worked on the new sacristy, which is this funerary chapel for the Medici family. Here you can see the lovely effigy of Juliana, which I just love. and the allegories of day and night on the top of the lid of the tomb. This was also changed numerous times. We have documents of him ordering different tomb lids 3 times because the sizes kept changing. It was more vertical, it was more wide. You can visit that today. It was never actually finished the way planned. Here's this lovely classicizing Renaissance interior with, here's the tomb of Lorenzo with dawn and dusk. And then on the left, you see 3 statues that are kind of just placed there. One of which is the lovely Medici Madonna, which you see there on the right. And this is one of those just, sort of supreme examples of the Madonna and Child where, the Christ child's in movement. He's sort of turning around, about to crawl up, kind of crawl up and hug his mama's neck kind of thing. I want you to look at the face of the Virgin because you're going to see a face that looks really similar to that when we go along. It's a very classic sort of almost Roman matron type profile that Michelangelo used for female figures. He went back to Rome in 1534, spent tons of time working in the Vatican. This is his design for New St. Peter's that you see on the left, part of which was followed. It was then, the design was changed, the nave was made much longer. He also worked on the dome of St. Peter's, which you see there on the right. So he spent tons of time in Rome on architectural commissions, also sculpture. He got to the point when he was older that when he was younger, he did not have a workshop. He was, in fact, a solitary artist. He made lots of changes as he went along. He didn't have a workshop that just reproduced from his preparatory drawings. He preferred to do it himself and in secrecy. So he did that. When he was older, he just didn't have the energy to go along with all this. And he was getting tons of commissions. He literally didn't have the energy to do it. And it, sculpting takes some muscle, right? So for some of his later commissions, he had collaborators who were Daniele da Volterra, who did the drawing that we saw in the beginning, and a man called Tiberio Calcagni, who literally was kind of his, he went out and, if he had to show a design to a patron, Calcagni took it and showed it to the patron. Or perhaps Michelangelo would do the preparatory sketch and it would be finished and all of the plans kind of worked up by his collaborator. So he was really collaborating with these people. And he began sort of entrusting them with some of his commissions. And then he even told one of his friends, who is Giorgio Vasari, who was an artist from Florence. He also wrote the lives of the artists. He wrote lots of different biographies, including that of Michelangelo, who he really revered, and they were also very good friends. So at a certain point late in life, Michelangelo told Vasari that he was retreating from architecture and painting, and he was just going to do some drawings and just concentrate on sculpture. That's what he wanted to do, and that's what he decided to do. And so we have a work of art from very late in life, and it's this Pieta. He did 3 Pieta. This is the second one. And this is a private work. He did it for himself. So every single thing he's done before now, he was doing for the, for a patron who said, I want this, that, and the other for my funerary tomb, or, I want you to do the facade of this. And, he was really, they obviously respected his art. I'm sure he had a lot of input, but what he was doing was dictated by the will of the patron and the budget of the patron. This work, and this, we're gonna look at 2 sculptures that he did totally for himself. He was the patron. So here we are, very late. He started working on this in, I think, 1550. So he's an older man, he's in his 70s. He's kind of confronting his mortality, and he decides to sculpt this very large work for his own tomb. This is going to be for an altar where he's going to be buried, and he chooses a Pieta. So here we go again. He's been sort of really working this idea of the Pieta all his life. He's a very devout Catholic. His writings really even refer to death as a return to the open arms of divine love. He's been a devout Catholic all of his life. He's lived through the upheaval of Savonarola in Florence in the late 1480s, Martin Luther in the early 1500s, the beginning of the Protestant Reformation. He knows what the Catholic Church doctrine is. He's been working with the church. He knows exactly how the imagery is supposed to fit into Catholic Church doctrine. He remains a very devout Catholic. So here he is, end of his life, he decides to do this Pieta. And he decides to populate it with various figures. You've got the mother and child, mother and Christ, with 2 other figures, and we'll take a closer look at them. What's really cool about this, just looking at it from this view, this is the most ambitious sculpture that he ever attempted to do. This is 4 figures. They're kind of intertwined, all these oblique angles, and it's carved from a single block of stone. So that was his goal. He thought that sculpture should be carved from a single block of stone. Perhaps for the virtuosity of his work, he could sort of show you, what he could do. Perhaps because the kind of integralness of the work itself, he preferred to work from one block of stone. A lot of sculptors could do something similar to this, but the leg would have been pieced on. And I'll show you how this works sort of with a tenon and mortise. And the arm might be different. This arm is probably a different piece. This whole girl is probably another piece. And you put all these pieces together and you get this populated sculpture. But to do a multi-figure group from one block of stone was a large challenge, So he decided to do that. He had to work out how these figures were going to interact with each other, figure out their proportions, make it work out compositionally, harmoniously, and also make it be a successful kind of meditation piece, which is what he's going for here. So it was his most ambitious sculpture. From that point of view, it was also one of the largest he ever did. The only other sculpture larger than this is David. This block here is over 7 feet tall and weighs 3,000 tons. This now weighs 3,000 tons. How much did it weigh when when it was a complete block? We don't even know. So it was left unfinished. And you'll notice that Christ is missing a leg, right? Christ's left leg is not here. And here's what it might have looked like. This is a wax model made by somebody who was around during the time when he was working on it. So this is, you see the left leg of Christ here, which is no longer present, the left leg. So this, it's also, I'm going to show you some close-ups. This figure is finished. These figures are just blocked out. The body of Christ is somewhat finished. His leg is gone. These figures are blocked out. The statue was abandoned. Here you can see from a different angle. See this hole right here? That's, they were going to sort of put a dowel in there so as to attach a leg. So somebody was considering attaching a leg, and it probably wasn't Michelangelo because he was not interested in attaching a piece, right? So the story is that Vasari was actually in Rome when Michelangelo was working on this, and he even reports that sparks were flying from the chisel. He was hammering and chiseling, and sparks were flying from the chisel. I happen to have a chisel right here. I'll show you that in a second. And he said Michelangelo wasn't satisfied. He was never satisfied with anything he did anyway. He was very sort of self-critical, and he left it unfinished. Then there's this sort of legend that says that Michelangelo took a hammer to it. He broke it to bits. His collaborator, Calcagni, finished it, and then it ended up with the collector called Bandini. This thing is now called the Bandini Pieta. Ended up with him. It was on view in Rome for a while, on view in Florence for a while. It's now in a museum. So it was in Florence for 200 years. It was moved, after its stint in Rome, it was moved into the Duomo behind the altar. So here's the interior of the Duomo. Behind the altar, this is where the statue was kept. So this is an unfinished statue by Michelangelo. It's behind the altar in the cathedral in Florence. And it received so many visitors that they're like, it was disturbing mass. And so they decided to move it into a museum because it was just getting too many visitors. So off it went into a museum. But it had been underneath some candelabras for so long that it was just covered with drips of candle wax. You can see that here. The conservators call it the Dalmatian effect. And then just after 470 years of being on view, it needed to be cleaned. It had never been, it had never been cleaned before. So there's just literally almost 500 years of dust, wax. They made a plaster cast out of it in the 1880s in order to put it into a gypsoteca at an art academy in Florence. This is the gypsoteca at the high school in Florence. And you can see there's other statues by Michelangelo in here, but not the one we're talking about. But that's what they were doing. They made a cast of it so that students could study from it. Well, bits of plaster were left on there because sort of in some of the chisel marks, there were bits of plaster. So 470 years later, they decided to make a restoration, or anyway, a cleaning, let's say. It wasn't necessarily restored, it was cleaned. And that just happened the past couple of years. It was unveiled just a couple of weeks ago. You may have seen that in the papers. So here are the conservators that are working. The conservation effort was paid for by funds from a philanthropical group called Friends of Florence, who sponsor restoration of lots of high-profile works of art and lots of works of art that need it. I'll give you their information later in case y'all are interested in checking out what they're doing. So here you can see the conservator. They're using Q-tips with warm water, and that's how they cleaned this thing. And they used a scalpel when necessary to remove the bits of plaster from 1880s. So I'm going to show y'all some details here, kind of half cleaned, half not cleaned. You can see the difference, how much getting that dirt off of there is. So they made a couple of discoveries. One, they found no evidence of hammer blows. the fact that the idea that Michelangelo may have gone and destroyed his own work with a hammer, I think remains an urban legend. They can't really disprove it either, but there's no pure evidence of hammer blows by Michelangelo. They also discovered that the marble is not from Carrara. Carrara was sort of his go-to quarry. There was another quarry nearby. If you remember that map up there on the kind of on the border of Tuscany and Liguria on the Ligurian Sea, is this quarry called Saravezza, which was property of the Medici family. So people who were going to do huge building projects would just, people with money would go and buy their own quarry, right? So here comes the marble. And so we don't know how this block of marble got to Michelangelo. Turns out it's from Saravezza. We never knew that until sort of the last year. That quarry, though, is known for stone with flaws. It's super, super hard. Marble is actually a very soft stone to carve. So you can sort of do more with it if you're a sculptor. This is a super hard piece of stone. And there are inclusions of pyrite, which is a mineral which, when it is struck with metal, creates sparks. So now we've got like sort of scientific proof of what Vasari was talking about, that he actually saw sparks flying as Michelangelo was hitting his chisel onto the stone. So it's common then that perhaps some parts of a work might be reworked because of a flaw. There's some evidence that maybe the elbow of Mary had gotten broken off. If there's a flaw in a piece of stone that's super hard, and you might just do a small, tick, 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 and you might lose a bigger piece than you're looking for. And if you're working in marble, once it's gone, it's gone. If you have enough stone left, then you can sort of, just change your composition a little bit, and maybe if you have stone to spare, then you can maybe just sort of move the arm so that you can still sculpt it. But it may be that left leg is gone because of a flaw, and it just wasn't possible to fix it. And the leg itself, actually, we have records of it in existence. It was in the collection of Daniele da Volterra. We lost track of it at a certain point, but the leg itself was out there. As y'all saw, there was that the hole for the dowel. So somebody perhaps was going to attach the leg, and that person probably was Tiberio Calcagni. So the story goes that Calcagni finished it. And some people actually think he finished it sort of poorly, and they don't particularly like the way he handled the Magdalene figure. There is a mountain of scholarship on Michelangelo. It's like taller than Mount Everest. And you start digging around in there and you're never going to finish. So, I mean, I've read through a decent bit of it, but there are people who don't necessarily think that Calcagni did a good job on the figure of the Magdalene. I kind of think that if Calcagni was going to finish the work of art, he was going to finish it, and he didn't. He left these figures just barely blocked in. This figure is kind of polished, and this figure is barely blocked in. If he was going to finish it, he would have added the leg too, right? I mean, why not? If you're going to finish the thing, go ahead and add the leg. He didn't do that either. So what it looks like now is that, and I think some people have been looking at documents, and what it seems to look like now is that this trusted collaborator, Calcagni, basically put it back together. The arms were broken. We don't know how they were broken. Somehow something happened. The sculpture was abandoned. The arms got broken. The leg is separate. This person, who was a very close friend of Michelangelo, a Florentine living in Rome, his name is Bandini, he wanted the sculpture, and Calcagni put it back together so as to give him the sculpture. And this is all while Michelangelo is alive. This is his friend Bandini, his collaborator Calcagni, and he's there. So presumably he either supervised the work or at least approved the work. So Michelangelo knows what Calcagni did. And my feeling is that he just consolidated and kind of made it presentable, right? So as far as the Magdalene figure goes, she in fact is finished. The other three figures are not finished. She is quite small compared to them. You can see here though that Michelangelo actually blocked out her sides, right? And this was done way before the leg fell off. This is the arm of Christ, the hand of Nicodemus, the other figure, and then here's the Magdalene. And here's the Magdalene's face, which actually has that very sort of typical classical female face that we sometimes see in Michelangelo's works. I'll show you a few more close-ups here. You can really see how these figures are just blocked out, not finished. Here's the underside of Christ's chin. And you can really see, I hope the connection here is, the resolution is high enough that you can really see the fine work that was done here with chisels and the kind of more coarse work that was done here with the subia. The subia is this utensil with a point. And then the other ones are called raschietti, which have little, they're like little, a raschiette was a little rake. That's like a little rake. And I just learned that Michelangelo, this is sort of a two-toothed raschietto. And when a sculptor sculpts, I don't have a hammer, he holds it like, he holds it like this, and he goes like this. And you have to use a large ton of force. Apparently, if it's longer, you can use less force. And I just learned that Michelangelo had his subia extended. They were super long so when he was older, because he just didn't have the physical force. So he used these super long utensils that required less muscle to actually break the stone. But can you imagine how much precision you would have to have if you have a long, I don't know how he did it. But he did, and you're looking at it. So here's some more details. Here's the finished work, cleaned. So notice again, Mary Magdalene, this figure, she is life size. She's also the only person who's looking at us. Those other figures are much greater than life size. So there's Mary Magdalene. She is looking at us. She's sort of presenting to us. I see that Mary Magdalene is presenting to us the finished group, which is Nicodemus, who was a Pharisee, and then Christ and Mary. So the figures here, interestingly, are not just Mary and Christ, but Mary Magdalene, who was a sinner in her previous life, repented, became a follower of Christ, and she was actually chosen as the first person to see Christ when he was after the resurrection. And here she is in this statue that Michelangelo is putting on his own tomb, and he's sort of hoping for redemption for himself. And then Michelangelo's face is actually the face of Nicodemus. So Nicodemus is a Pharisee. He spoke with Christ in the temple. Christ told him that whoever believes in me will have eternal life. And then Nicodemus pops back up after the crucifixion. And here's Michelangelo sculpting himself, self-portrait as Nicodemus, who in this Pieta is holding up he's giving the body of Christ to the Virgin. The Virgin, they're sort of trying to hold up this body. It's difficult, this is a corpse, sort of, literally dead weight. And how do we hold, he's trying to give the body of Christ to the Virgin so the Virgin can hold him on her lap, and hence the Pieta. The Christ is actually between the Virgin's legs. He's kind of slipping. This is not a static sculpture like the first one we saw in Rome. So there's a lot of movement here. Not only do we have these sort of S curves, and this sort of this kind of rhythm of these curves and S's and ovals, but we've actually got this zigzag, these oblique angles of Christ. His foot has hit the ground, his knee is going to hit next. And look at that arm, that twisted arm from the back. I just noticed that today, that it's the same as that relief. So here's, again, Michelangelo's kind of ideas for his own tomb sculpture. We have writings. Michelangelo was very prolific. He actually wrote poems, sonnets. He wrote lots of letters. He was quite literate in the Vulgate Tuscan, not Latin, but Tuscan. And we have writings from this period that really show that he was penitential. He was aware of his sins. He was facing death. He wanted to be united with Christ. And he chose the Pieta scene, which he had to abandon, or he chose to abandon. So let's just take a look at some drawings. So during Christ's life, during Michelangelo's life, he was very much concerned with kind of the passion scene, passion narrative. And you can see how he's literally working out the mechanics of how do we maneuver a body, right? How do live figures maneuver a dead figure? And you can see the deposition here. They're trying to get this body off the cross. Here, some figures carrying the body. They're almost dragging him. He looks like they're holding up from under the shoulders. Here's another series of work, same thing. They're all holding up sort of this, the weight of this person from underneath the shoulders. Again, this is more of a sort of a Pieta with the legs on the ground. These drawings tend to move into literally meditations on mortality. This is not so much of a preparatory drawing as it is a votive type drawing. This is a presentation drawing, which actually is kind of a new thing. This is not a preparatory study for anything. This is a finished work of art in itself. And here's a different kind of Pieta. Again, Christ is being held up literally by the knees of Mary and by the arms of those little cherubs. This was given to Vittoria Colonna, who had a great correspondence with Michelangelo at the end of her life and at the end of his life. And a lot of his kind of writings on his faith were found in letters to her. So his last work that he is working on, literally in the just a couple of years and literally the days before he died, was another Pieta, and it's the Rhonda Pieta. This is also about 7 feet tall from a skinnier block. It's in the Castello Sforzesco in Milano. And you can see how, again, see his working methods, how he uses the subio, kind of some of those rough cuts, clearly unfinished again. You can see how he's given to revising compositions as he goes along as well. Look, there's an arm here. This arm is from a previous version, a previous Christ. He keeps kind of reworking the same piece of stone. And he's really removing everything to hone in on the idea of salvation through personal devotion to Christ. He's left aside any intercession from the Magdalene, Nicodemus, no superfluous figures, super essential composition. He's also really taken away that idea of struggling to hold up the body. Mary is not struggling to keep Christ on her lap. You look at Mary's face, she's kind of more kind of resigned to fate. She kind of realizes that this is destiny. And she's not even really trying to hold him up. Or anyway, Michelangelo has gone beyond the pure physics of the mechanics of one person holding up another person. The figures have kind of melted together. Mary's gesture is like she's kind of pressing Christ onto her chest, kind of hugging him in a way, certainly not using enough force to actually hold the body in place. And sort of it's this tenuous embrace that really, again, we're kind of beyond the idea of a solid composition. We're almost kind of in this very kind of attenuated kind of mannerist type look. It's almost a C shape from the side. Christ is sort of hovering in this moment. He's about to slip out of her grasp, kind of destabilizing. And for us, it almost emphasizes the tragedy of the moment. That may be reading too much into it, but for me, that does do that. So it looks as if Mary's kind of losing her grip on Christ. Christ is sliding out, kind of slipping away as Michelangelo's own life is really slipping away at this point. I mean, he knows that his days are numbered. He wrote in a sonnet about kind of the idea of reducing and letting go. He said, the soul gains more, the more it loses the world. And art and death do not go well together. In which then should I place my further hope? He worked on this statue then until the last days of his life. He died in Rome on 18 February, 1564. He'd been acting kind of erratically before that. Calcagni, found him working. He was literally sculpting every day. They found him sculpting on a Sunday, which was not his normal procedure. He usually went to mass and did not sculpt on a Sunday, but he kind of lost track of the days. And Calcagni was sending reports back to Michelangelo's relatives in Florence. And one of the last letters said that Calcagni had found him out walking around in the rain. This is February in Rome, it's cold. And Calcagni said, this is really not a good idea. And he said, what do you want me to do? I'm not well. I cannot find peace and quiet anywhere. He was searching for peace. And I think he really found it in this sculpture, even though it's unfinished. This is what he was going for. And he really went far beyond kind of his sort of canonical representations of Madonna and Child to make this sort of purely visionary sculpture that is the Pieta that we see in Milan. So here's Michelangelo's funerary monument in Santa Croce in Florence. He was given a state funeral and has this nice, very elaborate monument designed by a Vasari, and you can see the effigy of Michelangelo, which is taken from that drawing by Daniele da Volterra that we saw earlier. So in the Florentine countryside, in this period, this is kind of what it looks like. So we're jumping out of Florence and into the Florentine countryside. And I was literally driving back from the grocery store the other day and looked out the window, and this is what I saw. I thought that light was so pretty, and the grapevines are starting to turn color. So what's going on right here, and if you look real close, there's about 5 cars right there. and people are picking grapes. So it's grape harvest season. We're at the very end of grape harvest season. But what we do with grapes in Tuscany in grape harvest season, you either make wine or you make schiacciata all'uva. So remember schiacciata? It's schiacciatoed. So this is basically bread that is squished down with your fingers to make it schiacciato, just flatten it. And this is typical bread that you find in Florence all year round, but with grapes, literally they only make that during harvest. There's sort of a 3-week period when you can find schiacciata all'uva, and everybody loves it. And I've been working on it the past couple of days, and everybody's like, Elaine has schiacciata all'uva. The kids are all excited. Everybody can't wait to have some schiacciata all'uva. So that's what we're going to make today. I'm going to show y'all how to make that. And then you can see here on this slide, there are the ingredients we're going to use. There's the information for Friends of Florence. If you're interested, you can go to the friendsofflorence.org. I'm going to show y'all now how to make some schiacciata all'uva. Okay, so if y'all have any questions, you can type into the chat, and then we'll open up the microphone at the end. So schiacciata all'uva is really bread dough, and the idea of schiacciata all'uva is that it's kind of hard, chewy. It's not super sweet. It's definitely chewy. And it's not a cake at all, right? It's very much kind of a chewy bread, and it's kind of sweet, sweet and savory at the same time. There's a lot of olive oil and salt in there as well. So to make the dough, it's a really simple bread dough. Flour, I'm going to go ahead and do it, and I've discovered the beauty of doing this in the KitchenAid with the dough hook. Simple bread like this. As opposed to, you can always do it by hand, but I'm kind of enjoying the dough hook these days. So I'm gonna go ahead and use the machine. So you can just use all-purpose flour. I'm actually using a mix of all-purpose and ancient grain flour. You can also use, a mix of whole wheat flour and white flour. I like to use some white flour just because it kind of ensures that my baker's yeast does the job and gets it leavened properly. So again, it's a simple dough. There is flour, water, yeast, and then a little bit of salt. Actually, not a little bit, a good bit of salt, and then a tiny bit of sugar. I'll put sugar in the dough. Let me get this in there, and then I'll depending on the kind of flour you use and the weather, you may need more water. And I've been having to use a lot of water lately, so I'm gonna go ahead and add some. So it's a full teaspoon of salt. So it really is a bread dough that in harvest season, bakers just add a little bit of grapes to. I'm going to go ahead and there's some sugar sprinkled around. I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit of sugar in the dough. That helps it kind of get a nice caramelly color. It turns nice and golden. Just a kind of a couple of tablespoons. I'm using a quarter of a cup of sugar total. Just a couple tablespoons in the dough, and then the rest of it goes into when you form the bread. I'm gonna scrape this down.
Elaine, we have a question. Michael asked if this bakery's yeast is very different because they with the yeast that they find at the grocery in the USA.
It is different, but you can sort of translate it into, you get those little sacks of dried yeast in the United States for the most part. I think you can find baker's yeast now. For some reason, we have these little cakes of baker's yeast. It's more common. But you can translate the amounts, and I'm going to try to do that. I'm going to send the recipes out tomorrow, and I'll try to make it clear sort of how to translate. I have to say it's relatively loose. You could use a little more or a little less, and it's not going to change anything very much. So it's not going to, that you can translate into the little Fleischmann's yeast packet without compromising the quality at all. I'm just going to help this come together. My flour needs so much water these days. So the dough comes together and forms, kind of forms a unit, and then the machine sort of kneads it for you. Very convenient. You would let it knead for several minutes. I'm just gonna go ahead and kind of form a ball of dough. So you would let it knead for a little bit longer. I'm going to show you a finished form. So the ball of dough then gets coated with just a little bit of olive oil, placed in a bowl, and then you let it rest, just sort of covered in a warm place. And I actually have one over here. So here's the difference between before you let it rise and then after you let it rise. It really grows. It's at least doubled, right? So now the key is just to kind of add in the grapes. And then my favorite bakery is this bakery called Marcucci in San Casciano Val di Pesa. And I really love the way that they make their schiacciata all'uva. They don't make it like a layer cake. Some bakeries will roll it out into a thin layer, roll it out to a thin layer, cover it with grapes, put another layer on top. And it's just like this sort of like it's like looks like a grape pie. Marcucci does this great thing where they just so one recipe is going to make two different kind of rounds. So Marcucci does it by this is how you make a schiacciata. So if you were going to bake this as schiacciata, you would just bake it just like this with those little dimples in it. You would put salt and
rosemary.
In fact, io ho dimenticato. Francesca, mi fai una cortesia? I forgot the rosemary. Mi puoi prendere un po' di rosmarino? Però devi prendere il telefono con la luce. È dietro casa. Hang on, with my friend Francesca who's helping me with the light. Y'all can see I'm lit so nicely. See. Grazie. So she's going to get me some. But she just closed herself out the door. Hang on a second. So regular schiacciata, though, is actually just this with oil and salt on it. But we are going to make the grape schiacciata, which gets grapes. It gets a little bit of walnuts. That's kind of a Marcucci trick. Grazie. Grazie mille. Rosemary. Thank you. So the key is to try to sort of fold the grapes in here and then squish it down again with your fingertips. And it would be nice if every bite got some grapes, but that's kind of hard to do. And then literally just a couple, lots of grapes, just a couple of broken up walnuts. And then kind of close it up on itself. So there's sugar in the dough, remember? I'm going to put some extra sugar on top. So there's that. Olive oil in the pan. So now I'm going to put it directly, flip it over, put it onto the pan that it's going to bake on, and then squish it out again. And at this point, there's some holes. It doesn't matter. Some of the grapes break and let out some juices. That's what makes it so yummy. So it's kind of like this thick, chewy bread with a little bit of kind of grape juice. Every now and again, a bite of walnuts. So in the dimples, then you kind of pour olive oil on. It kind of just pools up. And then instead of salt, we're going to sprinkle it with sugar. kind of a lot. The sugar sort of caramelizes a little bit on top. And then you have to have a couple of little rosemary needles. Now this then rises for 30 minutes before you put it into a hot oven. So you put a cloth on it, let it rise for half an hour, bake it for about 40 minutes. And then I'll show you how it comes out. So here is the finished product. So this is what everybody's been going crazy about in the neighborhood. Yummy. Look how yummy that is. Look. So schiacciata, again, it's really chewy. It's kind of savory. There's a lot of salt in there. Look how yummy that piece looks. That look good. Do you have any questions?
I want a bite. I want a bite.
Schiacciata luba.
When would you eat that, Elaine? Or what?
Well, that's a good question. So like I would eat this. I think I even called it an after-school snack when I sent out the announcement. It's kind of an afternoon snack, like a merenda they call it, just a little snack. But I brought it to supper last night, and there was a little girl who's 12. She's like, "Ooh, dessert." But for her, it's dessert. But you know, we're American, and so it's not very sweet, right? I mean, it's vaguely sweet. You can serve it as dessert, or you can have it as a snack.
We have also 2 questions, almost 3. Okay, does the type of grape matter?
That's a good question too. These are either, I'm not sure if it's Sangiovese or Canaiolo. This is the grape the bunch that
the original grapes must have Canaiolo, must be Canaiolo, but
they should be Canaiolo.
Yeah,
this could be Sangiovese. It's still good. Just saying.
But also black.
It has to be dark grapes. And the better thing would for them to be small and have kind of a thick skin. You don't want a big, huge grape because it would just be too liquidy and it would get gushy. So you just want some small black grapes, preferably Canaiolo.
And do you let it rise again after adding the grapes?
Yeah, so it's now going to rise another half an hour before it goes in the oven. So the first rise is 1 hour. You form it like we just did. It's now resting. I have it under a cloth over here. It's resting like this in a warm place, already formed. And so after half an hour, I'm going to stick it in the oven and it will come out like that.
And the last one, but the answer is yes. Is do the grapes have seeds? Yes.
Yeah.
The grapes have seeds.
That's another thing. Yeah, this is one of those things that for the Americans who live over here, we call it a food surprise. Because you wouldn't really think that a grape would be crunchy. But and I was talking to a friend the other day. She's like, "Yeah, I used to not like that, but I've gotten used to the crunch. So now we like it because it takes a while, but you get used to the crunch." But you can also use seedless grapes, but try to find small ones.
In fact, in this period of the years, you can listen a lot of people make a sound like is the seeds. They split the
people spitting seeds. Yeah. That's what it is. Like it's like spitting watermelon seeds. Only it's spitting grape seeds.
And the salt, Elaine, the salt is a little contrary to pane Toscana. Normally doesn't have salt in it. Would this be considered?
There's no salt in the there's no salt in the dough of Tuscan bread. I put a little salt inside the dough here. I could have just sprinkled it on the top, which is what normal schiacciata is. I went ahead and put the salt in the dough and then sprinkled sugar on top, but you could have just sprinkled both, but I went ahead and put it in the
and one other thing, going back to the sculpture, the Pieta in Rome, if memory serves, that's the only excuse me piece that Michelangelo signed.
Yes,
is on the strap that comes across the bosom of Mary, huh?
Right, yeah. I guess he didn't have to worry about that anymore.
But I think it says Michelangelo Buonarroti made this. I think he.
Yeah, I don't remember. Probably. That's what they usually would say. It's kind of like people who do posts on Instagram and don't have to use any hashtags because they have so many followers. They could just forego the hashtag. Yeah, Michelangelo didn't have to send stuff. Yeah. They
How many followers do you think he would have on Instagram?
I wonder. I don't know. He might have stayed away from that. There was a question on the chat that says, "Can you make this with olives?" Sure, you can make with olives, but the thing about then you would have olive bread. The thing that's so good about this is that look, the grapes release their juice. See how yummy that looks?
Sure looks good.
I mean, it's not like a super over the top American dessert sweet, but it's actually really good. And the kind of savory bread with the sticky grape juice is good.
Sorry, I have to say something because I am from Florence, so I need to say something. So this is a typical dessert, Italian Florentine dessert, because it's not sweet. So
right.
This is very important. And you can use fig in fichi.
Oh, good idea. Yeah.
If you don't want to use grapes, you can change with figs and walnut, for example. But the original one is with grapes. And we put a little bit of salt because this is not bread, it's a schiacciata. In schiacciata, we put the salt. Is the difference.
In the dough or on top di solito?
We put also in the dough,
Okay.
but il sale grosso sopra.
Big salt.
Big salt
Oh, okay,
over.
Big salt.
And
I did not know that. Thank you, Lorenzo. I did not know that. I thought that there was no salt in the schiacciata dough, and just on top. And on top, there's like a lot of oil and a lot of salt. But apparently, like he just said, there's a little bit of salt also in the dough. It's a nice. I mean, it is kind of a heavy bread dough, and it's just really chewy. It's not light. It's not like a focaccia that's fluffy at all. It's a very, very much a flat, chewy bread. Somebody just asked a question about the Moses. Lorenzo, io non vedo il chat. I don't know why I can't see the chat. Where is it?
Io la vedo. Where did the statues of Moses end up?
Yeah, I can't see that. So what was the question about Moses?
Where is the statue of Moses?
Moses is now in the Church of St. Peter and Chain, San Pietro and Vincoli, in Rome. Yeah. Okay. Any more?
Yeah, we have
about olive oil. There was an olive oil question.
We have a question. Yeah. If what's the situation of olive oil, of Sagon olive oil this year?
So we haven't started pressing yet, so I was just using Sagon as last year's oil. This year we actually don't have very many olives, and so we are gonna. Last year we made a field blend, this one, and we made 2 monocultivars. This year we're just going to make the field blend. We don't have enough olive oil to make 3 separate oils. We're just going to make this one, which is our field blend, Tuscan varieties. So we'll be making that. And I am going to announce that probably next week. I'll send out an announcement, and all of y'all, if y'all have registered for class, you're on my mailing list. And so I'll send out an announcement for Sagon olive oil. And we also have a new project, which we're doing from this year, which is we are going to be making some Southern olive oil. Oils from the south of Italy are super good, and I usually keep them in my kitchen, and my partner Daniele, business partner Daniele, also keeps them in his kitchen, and we decided to kind of offer that to y'all because they're such good flavors, and they're very different from Tuscan oils. They have a very different perfume. So our goal is Sicily, but Sicily had the same problem that we did this year, which is hardly any olives, and so we are going to start out with an oil from Puglia, and it is going to be called Dispensa, and it's a Coratina olive, and we'll be announcing that along with our field blend. So keep your eyes out, and we'll have some new Sagon olive oil, hopefully by the end of the month. It'll be available in early November. Thanks for asking. Anybody else questions?
I have a comment to make. I remember, I think it was the first time that Elaine made schiacciata, and I had the privilege to visit at that time when she lived at the Casalina on the mountain above Loro Ciufena, where Sagana is located. And we were, it was beautiful, a twilight time on a day during harvest. And she remembered schiacciata and that it was traditional to make it in the wood-fired oven. She had a wood-fired oven, which she had never fired up before. And so we just jumped in and decided we would do this. She called Brunero, who had a pizza place in Laura Tufena, and he came up and started the fire for us. He wanted to show us the right way to prepare the fire in the wood-fired oven and how hot to get it and what to do with it. And she cut the grapes from the arbor right there on the terrace. And here we were in the twilight overlooking the Val d'Arno, getting this thing going. And it was really exciting. And at one point, Brunero said, "Where is your dough?" And we just ran in the kitchen and started putting flour and yeast together. It was wonderful. And to have the grapes right there from the arbor and to prepare this thing and have Brunero say, "Yes, you're doing it right," and get it and put it in the wood-fired oven, which he had gotten very, very hot. It was really, really a wonderful experience.
That was a fun time. Yeah. Yeah, it's always nice to fire up the oven. I never got very good at that though, because you have to balance your wood on one of those peels, and it's always you have to kind of get up in there to get the fire started. Once the fire's going, it's easy.
The first thing he did was clean it out, brush it out. He didn't clean it very much. He just kind of brushed the stone off.
It hadn't been used in a while. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Well, we have a wood-fired oven here at Popiano where I live, and it doesn't draw, but I was just talking to somebody about that today who is interested in getting it working. So if we ever get that working, we'll do a class out in the wood burning oven here at Popiano. So
that would be wonderful.
And that would be
Schiacciata in the fall.
Exactly. Yeah, thank you so much. Mom, thank you for that. Was my mom. That was my mom's memory of making schiacciata up on the mountainside. Mom, thank you for that. That was nice to remember the schiacciata.
Question. I'm here. Question. Here I made it. Somebody had asked, and I was wondering the same thing. Why are grapes so scarce? Olives in certain regions this year.
Oh, that usually depends on a variety of factors. One is that the olive tree produces a lot one year and a little the next year, and so it's kind of cyclical. Areas are kind of cyclical together, and so last year was a huge production, and this year would have naturally been a lower production. That was coupled together with some climatic factors, and where we are in particular, there was a lot of. It just happens that our trees were in flower when the first early unexpected heat hit, and it was really, really, really hot while the trees were flowering, and they didn't all get a chance then to turn into olives. And then on top of that, it was so dry that, and I didn't have this, I had the other problem. I didn't have this problem. I have one grove that's got a lot of olives and two that don't have so many. Another colleague had a lot of olives, and he said that they just turned black and fell off. There wasn't any water. No, it hadn't rained for months. So that also, so even people who had olives then ended up losing olives. So that's, agriculture, Mother Nature, the way it is.
Thank you.
So we'll have more next year. So
Good.
All right, Elaine, when you get here in December, I want to make some of that stuff. It looks so good.
you want to, I'm sorry, we had a little connection issue. What looks good?
We need to make some of this schiacciata when you get here in December.
There won't be any more grapes. It's literally a 3-week period. You have to be here during the 3-week period when they're picking grapes. You have to wait till next year. You have to have grapes.
No, I'm talking about when you come here, we'll use grapes from the Kroger.
Oh, okay.
Schiacciata.
I agree. That works.
I'll let you know. Please see how that works. We'll let y'all know.
All right, then. And by the way, I'm about decided to come to Venice, so come on and visit me. I'm trying to get a Thanksgiving dinner from the Gritti Palace. They're working on that now. So.
All right, sounds good. Everybody come visit. There's some people. There are people who are planning trips. There's some people who are here now. I'm actually teaching a cooking class in person on Monday. So things are back up and going. I know.
Great.
Good. So we can plan some trips. And I'm going to try and plan after olive season's over, we'll put together a trip for our group. I'll be announcing a trip for y'all so we could all travel together maybe next spring, if that sounds good to y'all.
Right.
So keep that in mind. Okay.
Perfect.
Great.
All right. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Thanks for all your very good questions.
Thanks.
And I hope y'all will try some schiacciata.
Okay, ciao, Lane. Ciao, Lorenzo.
I'm going to Kroger to get my grapes right now.
Yeah,
All right, go for it.
put them in the freezer. They'll be real hard when you get them.
Yeah, right. Thanks, David. Bye.
Thanks,
Yeah.
y'all. Bye, everybody.
Bye.